time for Community Forum, and we're very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Larry Beinhart. Larry Beinhart is best known as the author of Wag the Dog, originally published as American Hero, on which the film starring Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman was based. He has written 6 other novels, as well as 3 with his wife, Gillian Farrell. He is also the author of 2 highly acclaimed works of nonfiction, Fog Facts, Searching for Truth in the Land of Spin, and How to Write a Mystery. His articles have appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the International Herald Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Baltimore Sun, and the Chicago Tribune. He has been awarded the Edgar, the Gold Dagger, the Grand Prix de l'édition policière, the New York Times Notable Book of the Year, and was a Raymond Chandler Fulbright Fellow. And he is here to talk about his new novel, Salvation Boulevard. Start out and tell us, what was your motivation in writing Salvation Boulevard?
You know, I woke up one morning in the 21st century. I looked out the window. I thought I was having a bad acid flashback because outside it was the 12th century. There were holy wars, jihads. President of the United States was sending out troops because he believed that God had called him up. If it was the 12th century, on a psychic telephone, I assume, not the red phone. And God said, George, because they're on a first-name basis, said, George, invade Afghanistan. And apparently God was so pleased with that, he called back. And he said, George, liberate Iraq. And so George did. Now, this raises the question, is God an incredibly bad military tactician, or is the president a Looney Tune who's hearing voices? And neither of these questions was raised in the public sphere. And I'm always fascinated by questions that are visibly right there in front of you, that are dying to be asked, that nobody's talking about. And I felt that the great mystery is the ancient great mystery. What is God? Is there a God? Why do people believe if there isn't one? And if there is one, why can't he make himself clear for once? Right? Why does he keep giving different revelations to different people so that they end up saying, my revelation is better than your revelation, you don't believe it, I'll kill you? Or you may have conquered me, but I still believe my revelation, so you can burn me at the stake and I'll smile. I think these are really important, profound questions. I think they're really important questions for the public dialogue. You know, people are really dying and really being killed over these things. And to relate it to today's event, our economy is really being distorted by them. You know, one of the things that happened, apparently, you know, when God called up, he didn't say, and while you're at it, you know, make sure you do it as a pay-as-you-go thing. You know, he let George run with this kind of off-the-books debt financing, which I think is at the core of today's financial problems. So anyway, I wanted to write a book that dealt with those issues. Right? Not necessarily actual wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, but issues of faith. And I'll give you the pitch meeting summary of the book, because it is a mystery thriller. The corpse is an atheist professor. The accused is an Islamic foreign student. The defense attorney is a Jewish lawyer. The investigator is a born-again Christian. The mystery is God. So what's happening in the book is that there are a group of people, all of whom have their actions motivated by their beliefs. And, you know, not in a diagrammatic way, but just naturally, as most of us do. You know, we don't talk about it that much because God is not supposed to be discussed at the dinner table or in the public forum terribly. But everybody involved in this story has their worldview, and they make decisions based on that. And there are kind of 2 stories in the book. The book is told by the born-again Christian who narrates the story. And he's one of these people who his life had been out of control. You know, he lost his first family, he was semi-alcoholic, he was doing drugs, and he was a police officer at the same time. He was involved with some police officers who were becoming very corrupt. And one day, in the middle of the day, when he was in a bar drinking, another police officer comes along and says, "Look, I want you to come with me," drags him into one of these mega churches. And the pastor of the mega church lays his hands on him. He feels the bolt go through him, and he comes to Jesus, and suddenly his life has an order to it, and he's able to bring it under control, and he builds a new life, which is a satisfying one and a safe one. And then along comes this case, and he's brought into it by his best client, who's this hotshot Jewish lawyer, who does mostly big criminal cases with lots of money, but also does causes occasionally, because he feels a little bit guilty about all this money that comes from dirty sources. And he comes across this case where this college student, who happens to be Islamic, an Iranian foreign student, has been arrested for the murder of the atheist college professor. Okay, so on one level, the arc of the story is an investigation of whether this kid actually did the killing, and if he didn't, who really did it. On another level, it's kind of the story of Job. And Job is the hero. Because the two people, the dead atheist professor who's left a book behind, and the minister who saved the hero, who's a minister from a megachurch who's very wealthy and politically connected. And from their points of view, they're in a war for souls. And the soul they're battling over is this one guy. And even though the atheist is dead, he's left a book behind. And one thing we can learn from the Bible is if dead people leave a book behind, they can be very, very influential. So he's going along, and he's a believer, and yet he keeps running up against things that make his beliefs questionable or contradictory, and he's got to start confronting these questions. Among them, does morality come from God? Or if it doesn't, where does it come from? Can belief in something good lead you into actions that are evil? Can somebody who has beliefs that you think are wrong be doing good things? And on like this. So, you know, I try to construct something that was both action-driven and a real mystery thriller with some chases and gunfights and a dame and a little bit of sex and some very funny scenes, and yet that brought you into these grand philosophical questions, because I find that entertaining.
Well, and apparently there's enough of that where your book got picked up fairly readily, I believe.
It has been optioned for a film, and I met the director, fortunately, and he seems like a real smart, intelligent guy. He's doing the screenplay for it. His name's George Ratliff. And so, yeah, I'm real excited about that. And it also looks like, now that doesn't mean it's going to get made. It just means somebody's going to write me a fairly small check for an option. Okay, I mean, not a $15 check, but not hundreds of thousands of dollars either. And I also think that, I know that my previous book, The Librarian, which was a political thriller about an election, rather like the 2004 election, is also being picked up for an option. And I'll probably do the screenplay on that one. So I'm very excited about that. Watching the election news, and I think that this touches on that. It really does in a weird way. I think that if McCain wins, it is indeed. I mean, it is a tragedy, not just for America, for the whole world. However, I've reconciled myself to that because it's probably good for both my film deals. So you're supposed to laugh at that so people know I'm joking.
With this particular book, did you go out and did you do extra research on the specific religions, or is it more stuff that you pick up on a daily basis?
Yeah, we pick up religion on a daily basis. It's all over the airwaves. It's on television. You know, we listen to religious music all our lives, even if you don't want to. It's you know, religion is part of the culture. In fact, religion is part of all cultures. It's one of the human universals. So is morality and a sense of justice. I mean, there's a whole list of universals, but religion is definitely one of them. And this is one of the questions I really wanted to explore. And what I did, you know, it's funny when I said there are two books, there are really three books. Or even four. There's the book the philosophy professor wrote, okay, which I kind of wrote. It's not in the book because it would have weighed down the narrative. Only snippets and fragments of it are. And then there's a nonfiction book that I would write, which is appearing in bits and pieces. I think the first 4 sections are up on my website, larrybeinhart.com, to, you know, delve in a nonfiction way into the ideas that underlie the book. So there are those 2 extra stories going on, and wouldn't fit in a novel, but all that thought and effort had gone into trying to figure out these questions, and they really are interesting questions, you know. And if you want to ask about belief, and we should ask about belief, because in the United States today we have one party which is essentially the party of a religious group, the religious right. If you remove the religious right from the Republican Party collapses like a tent with its pole pulled out. If you but it works in reverse, because by making that alliance, they've made their political agenda a religious one. And they're thinking about economics, which dominate the scene. They totally dominate our economics dialogue, is essentially a theological point of view. They believe in free markets in a theological way rather than a practical way. They believe in America in a theological way rather than in a practical way. And you keep seeing this every time the president talks about torture, for example. He says, well, Americans don't torture. We're the good guys. Don't people understand we're the good guys? And a practical person says you're the good guys when you do good things, you're a bad guy when you do bad things. Or even you're essentially a good guy, but you're doing something bad now. Theological person says, we're the good guys, so no matter what we do, must be good. Just as when people who believe in God look at God and they say, well, I don't understand why God has arranged for little children to be slaughtered by either people or rivers or mountains or earthquakes. But he's made these arrangements. He's God. He's good. Therefore, this must be good. You know, so that's theological thinking as opposed to practical thinking. So, if you want to, that's why these are important to study. So, if you want to approach the study of God, you get into a really interesting question: what perspective are you going to study it from? And there are basically three perspectives. There's from a believer, you call it missionary position, as an agnostic, which is the no position, or as an atheist, which I like to refer to as downward-facing dog. And each one forces you to ask different questions. If you start as a believer, you have to ask the question we talked about before: why does God tell different people different stories? Or if you believe that your story is the ace number one story, how do you know that yours really is that? When the next prophet comes along, how do you know that God isn't doing another rewrite? And, you know, God is notorious for doing rewrites. Even if you're a Bible believer, and you're willing to read the book fairly objectively, you see that over the arc through the Old Testament and then into the new one, he's changing all the time. He morphs from a tribal deity who is willing to admit the existence of other gods, even amongst his own tribe, to one who is the one and only God, no matter who anybody believes in, and becomes a universal God. And then when he, stepping outside the Christian tradition, when he moves into Islam, he not only is a God in the spiritual sector, he is able to take on the political, public realm as well. So he gets to rule everything. If you look at it from the outside, that's an evolutionary change. But anyway, if you look at trying to ask that from the inside, as a believer, it's a dead end because there are no answers. All you can do is walk up to the other guy and say, well, my belief's better than your belief, and he says, my belief's better than your belief, and you duke it out, you take out your swords and gallop at each other, and last man standing maybe had the true belief, but there never is a last man standing. There's always somebody left over. So the conflict continues. If you're coming at it from the atheist position, then you're getting really interesting questions. If belief in God is a delusion, as the title of Dawkins' book says, right? The God delusion. Then you have to ask the question, which Dawkins fails to come up with an answer to, even though he's a totally brilliant man, which is, a delusion is pretty much by definition dysfunctional. So how come atheists who are free of this delusion are not routinely happier, healthier, and wealthier than people who are believers? And they're not. In fact, according to most of the surveys I've seen, they don't even have more sex. And according to, the spate of religious political scandals we've had lately, they don't even have kinkier sex. So how can something that is a delusion be functional? And that requires, so that's the question you have to answer if you take it from the atheist position. All right. If you're going to proceed, you have to proceed. If you hope to make progress and come up with any kind of new answers, new perspective, new way to get a handle on what's going on here, you have to start from the atheist perspective. The believer perspective has been at a dead end since there have been competing revelations, 2,000 years, 3,000 years, I guess, 3,000 years, and no way to sort it out. Agnostic position, you can't ask the basic questions. You can't ask, why does God have different revelations, because you're not really sure whether there is one. You can't ask, why isn't it dysfunctional, because you can't say that it's a delusion. But if you start as an atheist, and you don't have to be one, just as a hypothesis, as an intellectual stance, if you start as an atheist, then you are asking questions about human beings. Right? And you can't put God on the witness stand and cross-examine him. You can't get him into the doctor's office and dissect him. You can't bring him into the terrorist cell and force him to explain himself. But you can examine human beings. And you can examine the way we think. You can come up with theories about them and test them. So if you're going to examine these questions, that's where you have to start, and that promises progress. Now you got to ask me another question.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me when you were talking about the three positions and using the happiness scale, I guess, as proof of the positions, wouldn't that also depend on the individual person's, how much they buy into each of those different positions?
I think it's pretty clear that, there's a bell curve of faith just as there's a bell curve of athletic ability, of sexuality, of loving of sports, of liking fashion. You know, we all have a certain spectrum of abilities, tastes, needs, so forth and so on, and you know, and there's some kind of scale that we're built into. And some people need a lot of religion, and some people need very little. And then, of course, that then gets influenced by culture, by what's available to you, and what's approved of, and what gets support. But clearly the religious thing, like the love of sports, is innate to humans. Like fashion is innate to humans. And then how you play that out is cultural. I also think that there's a certain portion of the population who is quite happy without a religion. You find, I was recently in Iran, which theoretically is 100% religious, except that the people I met a lot of people there who were quite prepared to say this religion thing is nonsense and that they don't believe. And they were willing to say that in a society where you could be sent to prison or even executed for saying things like that. And I think so. I think, for example, scientists are notoriously known to be atheistic. And I don't think that the pursuit of science has led them into atheism. I think that they have a mind structure that is excited by and comfortable with questioning and rationalism. And they are quite content, or not content, even eager to find, to go through questioning and then find answers that are supported by evidence and reason. And that's their nature. So they flow into science because that satisfies that kind of mental structure. And that kind of mental structure is comfortable with disbelief. So it comes along with it, it's not caused by it. If I were able to satisfy my ambitions, in addition to, like selling a mystery and getting lots of sales and making some money and supporting my wife and my beautiful children, what I really like to do is bring these issues into the public dialogue. I was personally appalled watching all our presidential candidates, virtually on their knees on television, explaining to the whole world in front of the cameras how much they prayed and how much their faith had influenced their lives and how much they would rely on faith in the crises to come. I mean, if there's anything we ought to have learned from the last, 8 years, is that faith, and certainly faith without reason and faith without other moral considerations, is a disastrous mode of decision-making. I mean, the Constitution says there shall be no test of faith for public office in the United States. But in fact, in practice, now there is one. And, not a single voice was raised to say, wait a minute, there is something fundamentally wrong with this. The entire media embraced it and participated in it. Next question.
Only a few minutes left. So do you think in your lifetime that the influence or the putting forth the selling of faith has increased?
Oh, absolutely. It was a shock to everybody. Everybody thought through the 20th century that faith was becoming increasingly a private matter. We were becoming increasingly a secular society, that religion was something you did on Sundays or at home, and you organized the rest of your life around other principles. And then along came Ayatollah Khomeini, and he said, well, I'm going to have a revolution and establish a theocratic state. And this was the first new theocratic state since, I don't even know when, the 12th century, the 14th century, something like that. It's been a long time since anybody did that. And that was paralleled in the United States by the rise of the religious right, which was partly a deliberate act. A bunch of right-wing Republicans got together, 3 guys, and they looked for a minister, and they found Jerry Falwell. And they paid him. And they said, we want to help you bring fundamentalist religious people back into the political process. And he did. And so at the same time, and apparently there was a huge appetite for that because people bought into it, and they bought into it rapidly and in great numbers. And so now we have at least one party in the United States as a theocratic party, and we have another party that is not opposed to it, that has now tried to say, oh, okay, this is one of the products that the American people want, so we're going to incorporate it in our brand. So Democratic New Coke involves a little flavor of good old-time religion. Right, and Barack says his prayers, and Hillary says her prayers, and they all have deep religious experiences, and are claiming that is part of the qualification to lead. So, it has made a huge comeback. Now, part of the reason it made a huge comeback, and you can read more about this on my website, of course, is that science made too much progress. First, because the real question we want answered is not how do things work or what does the world mean. What we want to know is what does the universe mean in relationship to me. And science went past that line and said the universe means nothing in relationship to you.
All right. We're going to have to end on that. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks a lot, Mike. This was fun.